Hey guys, welcome back to the Another Excuse podcast, where we chat to founders, creators, and self-starters about how they started and where they are now. Today's guest is Sam Simmons, the founder of MintPass. MintPass is a digital souvenir collection platform, but it's a lot more than that. It's basically solving everything that's wrong with the way we travel today. If you think about how you decide to go on a trip and the research you do beforehand, think about all the different apps you use and how many different links you send to the people you're going with. It's kind of all over the place. And MintPass is aiming to solve that by putting it all in one place where you can share your experiences and also hold on to the unique experiences that you had to look back over time. It's really exciting and I can't wait for them to launch. I'm going to be one of the first on there so I can get a head start on everyone else. In our conversation today, we discuss things like how MintPass works, how they could incorporate blockchain into the platform in the future, gamification and how important it is, and lessons learned on his journey so far. That's just the tip of the iceberg. This is a great conversation. I really enjoyed having it, and I hope you enjoy it too. Enjoy the show. Hi, Sam. Thanks for joining me today. So you're the founder of MintPass, and I'm looking forward to getting into what it's all about. But before we do, could you give me a bit of context of who you are and how you ended up founding MintPass?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much for having me, Byron. I'm super happy to be here. Where do I start? It's kind of a long and winding story that I'll try to keep as concise as possible. But I'm Sam. I'm based in Las Vegas, Nevada. My background's not at all in Web3, NFTs, or anything related to it, or travel for that matter. My most extensive background is in media. I formerly worked in poker content production, funny enough, doing streaming production, distribution of live tournaments and events for a company called Poker Go. I was doing that for several years. Around when 2020 came, I took some time off to do some brand consulting work, trying to figure out my next steps. All the while, especially in the poker days, I was exposed very early to crypto in general. And a lot of that was led by the financial use case of cross border payments. And I don't know how much you know about poker, but there's a lot of like wheeling and dealing back and forth, prop bets, just handshakes at the table where oftentimes there's a payout to be had. And the process of wiring money through traditional means may not be the most optimal for transfer of payments. So poker players very early started using crypto, and then as I was in my line of work, I was watching that play out, and so I'd put in a little money into it, but more of set it and forget it type of investment. Didn't do much with it, unfortunately, which I'd done more, much like a lot of people, I'm sure, and didn't really look at it again until call it 2020, 2021, right around when COVID hit. Put some more money into it, started doing more in that space. Separately was angel investing. 2021, things changed a lot for me. And that's when I came into NFTs. And for me, that was, well, first off, I got into it very irresponsibly. Like a lot of people degened into it very fast. I bought first, thought second. And in hindsight, that's okay. And it was part of the learning process. And I'm glad that I did it because it led me to where I'm at today, although I wouldn't recommend it for anyone trying to get into it now. But all that being said, after it was, once you had the moment of degen, I took a step back and said, okay, this is something that could be really cool. And for my purposes from my old poker days, one of my greatest challenges in serving up poker content was the feedback loop between our viewers, our fans, and the content to which we were providing to super serve that passion audience. And there was this disconnect where our metrics were the anonymity of streaming numbers and TV ratings, where we really had no mechanism to not only know how our content was landing on a very granular basis, but also get the feedback loop to say, well, if you don't enjoy that content, what content would you enjoy and how can we better serve you as our customer and fan of what it is that we're doing? So the NFTs and their ability to create that brand to fan, but also fan to brand relationship, but then also between fan and fan, which becomes a sense of community where you form this sandbox of opportunity and relationships between what people are passionate about, I thought was really special. So threw caution to the wind, went into the space full time, and now it's been almost 2 years of doing this. And that has looked like a mix of consulting work for brands, and especially those with what I think of as like traditional IP, who who don't exactly know what to do in this world. So I've supported those types of brands with strategy on how to implement Web3 strategies in a way that, of course, drives the bottom line, but also nurtures community and turns fans into that community via digital experiences. Doing investing with the VC Dream Ventures. We've invested in a handful of uh, Web3 native projects, as well as some in AI and other tech verticals. And then, of course, now working on MintPass, which we'll get into the meat and potatoes of as we go along. So I'll stop there.
Great. I think anyone who has traded NFTs at all has a similar kind of story. It starts off the degen way, sort of buy first, think about it later, and you then realize how it all works, how the tech works. You start doing a bit more research. It's motivated by making money, and then that slowly starts changing into realizing that it's a special place. The communities are really cool. So I really enjoyed it and started in a
Yeah.
similar kind of way.
Just to underline that, it's in the current climate too, that's all the more pronounced. And it's like those who are still here are those that took that step. I think that step is an important one, of getting past the point of like, okay, I'm going to degen money into this and hope that price goes up. And I think that's what we saw in the bull market quite often, and frankly was the problem with the bull market, was this culture of financial incentives to do anything. Whereas it's those, not to toot our own horns, but like us, who are continuing to have these conversations despite market conditions, that would be the non-tourists of the group, which I think will usher in, the next era of what the Web3 space becomes, which frankly is really exciting right now to have these conversations when there's not the noise to distract from them, because it's the conversations like that that are going to do the most effort in making this all mainstream.
Yeah, I agree. And so you founded a company called MintPass. What is MintPass?
Sure. So MintPass is basically a travel-based collectorship platform that allows you to turn your travel experiences into digital identity. And so that came out of basically the core thesis, which what got me excited about NFTs in the first place, which from my former life, I paralleled most directly to this world of media and streaming, where I sought to turn NFTs into a mechanism for bringing fans closer to what they're passionate about. So my thesis became very early on, knowing that I wanted to do something in this space that wasn't creating 10,000 pieces of Fiverr art with different animal characteristics, putting an adjective on the front end that created an alliteration coupled with a synonym for a group of individuals, put that together, make $2 million, bang, bang, boom. And I very quickly realized it wasn't a sustainable business model, which obviously has aged quite nicely. So other than that, what could we do to utilize NFT technology to bring people closer to what they're passionate about, A, but B, identify an underserved passion area that I felt like could be made better. And this all came out of COVID for me, so if this all timing works out, I had left the poker business in the early part of 2020, right around when COVID hit. For the couple years to follow, between lockdowns back and forth and everything in between, was trying to figure out my next move. And all the while, as someone who really enjoys travel, there was so much of, I guess for me, my personal identity that I found lost along the way when I wasn't able to experience the places that I love to visit. And having talked to a number of people in similar situations who also enjoyed travel, I found very quickly that was a common theme, where people often associate a part of who they are with the places they love to visit. And when they weren't able to visit those places, they lost a part of themselves in the process. So I said, okay, what about this? How can we create this digital mechanism to not replace at all the experience of travel itself, but extend the joys of travel as I see it? And think about the bookends of the travel experience, when you take your flight to get somewhere to when you return from your trip. Oftentimes, as it is today, other than maybe having pictures on your camera roll, or putting stuff up on Instagram, or doing a throwback Thursday 6 months down the road, there's not really a way to re-engage with this core memory, this experience that you had, that you see as a part of who you are. And we hope to alleviate that. We hope to create experiences both before, during, and after that extend the travel experience at large and make it more immersive in a way that's complementary to that physical experience. So that's what MintPass is. And that's all very abstract. What that exactly looks like is, whenever you take a trip somewhere, and for our initial launch in a couple months' time, it'll be for flights. You'll get to scan your boarding pass, and that generates what we're calling a digital souvenir, which it's basically like a physical souvenir, where it's an identifier of an experience that you had. And if you think about some people might think, well, souvenirs sound awfully trivial, but think about the importance of souvenirs to a lot of people. And as I've had more of these conversations, I find that so many people collect these things when they travel, and it may be something like a physical knickknack, or it may be like the currency or a newspaper or something of the sort. But it's a behavior that we see time and time again. But why do people do that, and what is it that makes that special? And I would venture to say that it's not the plastic that that thing is made out of. It's not the glass. It's not the paper. It's the memories you associate. So why can't that be taken digital and really scaled in a way where it's not bound by physical factors of storage and preservation, but it could be taken online, it could be shared with friends, it could become this holistic picture of your digital identity. So that's part one. You collect, all it is digital souvenir collecting. Take that step one. Step two, think about like what we do with travel and what we prioritize in travel. Oftentimes that's the sharing of travel experiences. So there's a fun stat that I like to cite that for millennial travelers in particular, which I myself am one, 97% of millennial travelers post on social media when they travel, and 85% of millennials make travel decisions based upon other people's travel sharing. Where you have like this unspoken market around travel inspiration that is bubbling behind the scenes, and obviously there's like booking based brands that are doing work in this space, but there really isn't that single repository for that experience. When you think about like what that looks like in practicality given today's existing platforms, it's oftentimes, you know, Instagram stories, which are finite in nature and last for 24 hours. You may have posts where for someone who you know who went somewhere, you need to scroll down their feed to find that post they had from several months back. It's going to TikTok influencers who are doing a day in the life where you're scrolling through all these different things that they do without any really means to make that actionable, where you have all these inputs for decision making when it comes to taking a trip somewhere without any real mechanism to consolidate and transfer that into practical booking and decisions. So this becomes that where the digital souvenirs that you collect along the way are basically signifiers of this experience in a way that creates this picture of what you've done, and what you've done can then be shared with others seamlessly, holistically, all in one place. So think of it as like peer-to-peer, but also automated travel inspiration, where in this eventuality, you have this dashboard interface, both for your own experiences and those of others, where you could share, you could see what your friends in your network have done before you take a trip somewhere to inform your own travel decision-making. But then as well, and this is the fun part, we integrate AI such that we get to know you as a traveler based upon your profile. And then when you're trying to either plan a future trip or when you're experiencing a future trip, we provide you with an automated concierge based upon your travel experiences and travelers that look like you from the network. So it's obviously all encompassing. I tried to give a holistic overview in that sense, but to consolidate it, it is digital souvenir collecting that powers peer-to-peer and automated travel inspiration, peer-to-peer with your friend group and network, knowing what your friends have done and being able to make decisions based upon that, automated with AI such that we get to know who you are as a traveler, and we could provide custom curated concierge support as you travel based upon your past experiences.
Wow. Seems like you guys are solving a problem that everyone has. I mean, we've all been there trying to do the research for our next trip. We've got multiple tabs open, Excel spreadsheets. I mean, I was just in Rome and my girlfriend and I had an Excel spreadsheet of the places we wanted to go and whether we needed to buy tickets or not, how much were the tickets, and whether we bought the tickets, what date we were going. And I was like sifting through TikTok. It was all over the place, but there isn't really a solution to it. It's everyone just sort of deals with it because you imagine all these different parts as like separate entities and that they can't really work together. You're like, I need to book flights over there. I need to book my hotels over here. I need to do research on social media, but it just makes sense that it can be all in one place and would make travel so much easier.
Yeah, to echo that, having talked to a number of potential users, early waitlist adopters in a very similar situation to you, I find that time and time again that there's this hodgepodge of tech solutions existing that oftentimes make up what is like a straw man of a solution, which can be made so much better. So Excel sheets is definitely one of them. I find time and time again Google Sheets of like itineraries that get stored and tucked away for future reference. talked to someone last week who basically lives and dies by their calendar when traveling. And so when they take a trip and they need a reference back 6 years later, if they want to go back to the same place, they search the calendar to recollect what they had done. Uh, Apple's a big one. So Apple Notes, oftentimes, actually, my wife and I do that currently, where every time we take a trip somewhere, if we find something that we like, we record it in our notes, and then if someone asks us, "Hey, I'm taking a trip to this place that I know you went to," we can just quickly share that with them. So then they have as a reference point all these things that we did. Obviously, your camera roll, so being able to take pictures, create a shared album, have that resurface at some point in time in the future. So all of these things together, like, people are already doing this, and then that's the exciting part for us. Is like we see this behavior playing out time and time again, and the behavior and tendency is so strong that people are finding solutions with tech that wasn't made to be that solution. So how can we bring that all together and create a repository for that, for not only logging memories, but storing memories, preserving memories, and creating composability to memories, even such that you can link. And this is an important theme for us: is memories memories don't become memories until you have context. So I think of it as like experience plus context equals memories. So the logging aspect makes up the experience part, but then how do we insert that context? And that's when you get into like multimedia connection, utilizing images. Basically, the customization and composability factor to it all creates the memories, which this integrates the Web3 elements of this, preserving those on chain and creating socialized experiences around that, and the gamification elements that get included into it makes it for not only a tactical experience, which I think exists today with those other tech solutions, but makes it fun, makes it immersive. And we call ourselves a companion app for that reason. It's meant to be something that you have with you at all times and creates for something that's additive as an experience in of itself to the travel experience at large.
That's great. And so you mentioned a bit about your history, and you started in poker and then dabbled in Web3. But where does travel come in? Why the travel industry?
That's a great question. It goes back again to that thesis of, I'm a traveler myself, and as I was asking, what interest area is underserved, and to me, that was travel as a traveler, and that's really my credentials in travel, is just being someone that's been to a lot of places, which I think, which a lot of times you would immediately perceive that to be a disadvantage in this world, but as I've gotten to know the industry better on the travel side, I find that there's just frankly a lot of inefficiency and archaic technology behind the scenes. So while we're doing a lot to bring in a superstar roster of specifically advisors to supplement the intricacies of travel and like the mechanisms for booking and all the intricacies and everything like that, I like that our team brings a fresh perspective to the table beyond what you would see in the traditional travel world. So, to be honest, I don't really have a ton of experience there other than being a traveler myself. And in particular, I always cite this one, but I have like a knickknack counter or a bookshelf behind me, and like I'm a travel collector. Like I got this in Japan over New Year's, and it's just I've been doing the behavior that we're trying to make better for so many years, and that's really the spirit of what we're going for here. Is I'm building something for people like me, which is so easy to do. I don't want to say easy, but it's enriching to do, because ultimately my guiding star can be what is something that I would love to use. And as I've then described that back to a number of people who are like me, there's a lot of excitement and buzz around what this could be, which frankly just gives me a lot of energy with moving forward with this and having sort of my thesis based upon my own personal behaviors validated time and time again in these conversations.
I think that's one of the best ways to found a company, is scratching your own itch. I mean, that keeps you motivated. And to emphasize the point about how archaic some of the systems are, I think you mentioned an interesting fact to me about how airlines update their entertainment systems. What was that again?
Yeah, so one of our advisors, and he hasn't been formally announced yet. So for the sake of this conversation, we'll keep that off the record. But he's with a major airline player, specifically here in the U.S., like a top 3 or 4 name. And it's been enlightening from my end to understand some of the nuances behind the scenes related to the technology and how things operate. Because obviously, for our purposes, being very tech forward, what we want to do is build the infrastructure today to be a fit for these partnerships in 6 months, a year, 3 years, 5 years time. And because of the archaic nature of that back end, we need to prepare for that today as opposed to trying to retrofit it at a future point in time. Anyways, there's a lot of like just fun anecdotes that have come up along the way in these conversations. And one of them, and my personal favorite, is in regards to the in-flight entertainment system, where it's obviously super nice to have, and you have all these movies and games, whatever other or shows, whatever other things that can keep you engaged during a flight. And my assumption was always like, it lives in the cloud, and anytime that you want to add a new movie to that system, you could just press a button and that sends it to all the within the operating system and sends it to all these different units across all these different planes and so on. And obviously to any normal person that would make a lot of sense. But in the case of how it actually is, what you basically have to do every time you update the system is you take a flash drive, you upload all of the content onto that, and you go plane by plane, insert that stick into whatever like the contraption system is, let it upload, take it out, go to the next gate, go to the next plane, do it again, basically across all the entire fleet of hundreds of different planes. So it goes to show, and that's no one's fault. It just goes to show, it's every innovation that airlines have is built upon what is a archaic tech stack, where unfortunately that issue compounds the more innovative the technology gets. And at some point there's going to be a reckoning to say, all right, we just need to strip all this out and redo it. But then you encounter ongoing issues with delays and cancellations and crewing issues and stuff we see time and time again, where you have widespread tech outages with various airlines. So I don't have an answer to it, but there's definitely a lot of stories like that where you just would not believe how inefficient things are behind the scenes technology wise.
Yeah, that's crazy. I didn't believe it when I heard it. That makes no sense. That there's hundreds, thousands, fleets of thousands, and they have to do it all manually with the USB drive. Crazy.
Yeah, and that's part of the challenge. Is like it's a bit like changing the wheels on a moving car whenever you do anything technology wise. Like it's not like you can't really, if you have a fleet of planes, you can't necessarily take the car into the shop to overhaul it. Like planes are operating 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So how do you innovate? Like how do you pause, let's redo everything and then put it back into service? So that's the challenge that has to be faced. And again, there's smarter people than I am working on that. But for our purposes and being more tech forward and having a fresh start with everything that we're doing, we hope they catch up to speed sooner than later.
Yeah, like you said, I'm sure there will be an overhaul sooner rather than later. So why use blockchain to help solve this problem? Couldn't it be done without it?
Yeah, sure. And it's an important point in that. And my personal policy on this, both in terms of building MintPass, but also in my investing work and just how I see the industry, I think there's an ongoing issue of building Web3 for the sake of Web3, where the output becomes this convoluted mess of front end features that no one either knows how to use or even wants to use. Like Web3 is not a solution for everything, which I think is an important thing to realize here. So my perspective on it is that Web3 should be built based upon use case, which isn't a hot take at all. But what that looks like in actuality is it's okay to build product, at least certainly on the front end, without Web3 in mind. And then, so let's call it, just to label it, let's call it building Web 2 with Web3 in the roadmap, where you can plug Web3 into a Web 2 experience, where you have like the comfort, the usability of that Web 2 front end with the infrastructure of Web3, where you don't integrate the Web3 elements until use case necessitates. And that's the approach that we're taking to all of this, where in fact, for our initial launch, we're not planning to be on chain technically at all. Like, and in fact, I think there's a small chance that there's an outcome in all of this, depending on user feedback, where we never go Web3. And that could be a little bit spicy for how I describe it. I don't think that's what ends up happening, but really what we're trying to do is get the front end experience right first and create an in-app experience that is approachable to a mainstream audience. And to integrate Web3 too early or too dominantly even would be to sacrifice that. So Web3 comes second, and for us, that comes into play once there's a reason for it. And for me, I have a certain number of ideas for where I could see the Web3 sides going. I think cross ecosystem portability, I think, becomes very interesting. So can we create a dynamic where you collect these digital souvenirs, and then as you collect, we start to know about who you are and where you've been, and what advantages can I get, what rewards can I get in other ecosystems that can be made possible by me being able to show a badge from MintPass that says I've been to Rome, for example. A lot of people have probably seen the Lufthansa loyalty example. Etihad Airlines announced their NFT-based or Web3-based loyalty program as well. So we're starting to see a lot of these airlines experiment in this world. So to be able to plug MintPass NFTs into those worlds in such a way that they say, we recognize that this person has a certain level of credentials, of clout by where they've been, and it has been proven by MintPass. So what rewards can we provide them? And obviously that Web3 mechanisms come into play there. But then I'd say too, around just the aspect of memory preservation here. So not only the permanence of memories, but the immutability of memories. So bringing that on chain and bringing verification to what you've done and allowing that to be preserved forever. It's a bit of a funny sort of user issue or user problem, but if we consider souvenirs and using them as physical artifacts of experience that make up your identity, we see the issue of time and time again of collectors basically accumulating all these things over time, A, having no place to put them, or B, them getting lost, or C, just sitting in storage somewhere where there's not a way to preserve those things in a way that's not only easily shareable, but also permanent. So bringing that on chain, I think there's a big theme in that of just treating your experiences as legacy. And in my opinion, at least I'm not a super technical guy, but from my standpoint, there's no better way to preserve that legacy than bringing it on chain. I think a lot of times people would say they preserve that with their Instagram feeds or social channels and the like. But if your social channels get banned or Instagram goes away at some point in time in the future, like all of those memories get removed. So giving permanence and longevity to that, I think, is important in all of this as well.
Yeah, I think that is very important. And another thing that came to mind is the uniqueness of it all. Because, I mean, normal souvenirs, some or most of them are actually made in China, but they just sort of resemble the place that you visited. And thousands, if not millions of people have bought that particular souvenir. Whereas, from my understanding with MintPass, is you can create almost a unique to you digital souvenir, and it's in your wallet and you own it and no one else can replicate that.
Yeah, 100%. I'm glad you brought that up. So essentially when you're creating a souvenir, what it'll look like as you answer in this initial phase, you answer a few questions about your experience. So as a function of time of day, the activities you did, what the weather was like. And then that serves as the input prompt to create this AI-based artwork output that resembles the region coupled with the specific experience that you had to create this one-of-a-kind collectible piece, which visually, again, looks like what you actually did, which is kind of a cool phenomenon to be able to, it's to your point, it's not just the same thousands, tens, hundreds of thousands of little knickknacks that you yourself have and is special to you in your home, but then probably however many people have that elsewhere in the world. This is something that is basically verifiably unique to you, which I think is a very special thing. And then in the future, we want to even take this a step further to say, okay, knowing that we can create basically prompt-based dynamic NFTs, which change to your experiences, how can we enable, I think dynamic being the operative word there, how do we enable that dynamic experience such that as you engage with different activities of the region, it then updates your NFT to suit? So think about if you were to take a trip somewhere and you have like this base souvenir, and then you take a tour of the Louvre and all of a sudden you see the pyramid out front of the Louvre show up in the visualization of your digital souvenir. And then you have lunch at a cafe down the street and you order espresso, and the next thing you know, you see in the corner that cafe shows up and it becomes like this holistic picture of this experience that you had, and dynamically it evolves as you go along. So again, it goes back to not only the dynamic and one-of-a-kind nature of these things, but also the gamification layer. So getting to having this sort of surprise and delight mechanics where you get to not exactly know what you're going to get, but have a participatory role in whatever it becomes based upon what you do and what you log. So again, to your point, it is very much creating something that is certainly unique, but also customized to you, what you did, how you felt, what you experienced while you were having these travels.
Yeah, I think that sort of brings back even stronger memories. It can trigger stronger memories looking at something like that that is unique to you rather than something that is on your shelf where you're trying to sift through all the things you did in that place. It's almost, I don't know, it just seems better to me. Um,
Yeah,
so what does the success of MintPass look like?
it's a good question, and it's a tough one to answer right now because it goes down so many different roads of possibilities, and that's the fun but daunting part of the current stage. Is it's like a choose your own adventure novel where I have about 100 theses in my head for what I think will be popular, successful with where the app goes, but to if the app is done correctly, not all of them will be successful, if that makes sense. Like we're going to see roads that are more successful than others, and those are the roads that we double down on, and we see those grow. And if that's what's providing most value to the users, that's what we'll be building. So I think I have to keep it broad because I don't want to get too feature specific, but success looks like making every aspect of travel better ultimately. And I take the companion app experience literally in that sense where we want to support the planning in the before, the enjoyment during, and the commemoration after the fact. And again, there's so many roads that could go down from the standpoint of you think about the AI during planning, but I also think the AI comes into play during the during travel and the concierge element. Think about going down the street, and because we know you enjoyed this cafe in Rome, we know there's a cafe 100 yards away where you could stop to have a coffee, and we send you a push notification to say, "Hey, you're gonna love if you go here really quick. You should go check this place out." So it's like it's proactive as well as reactive, which I think is a really special thing and separates ourselves from a lot of the AI based let's call them plug-in platforms out there. But then beyond that, getting into like the on-site experiences. So knowing that I touch down, I claim this thing as like my first step to a new trip. What are the things that I could have this unlock from like AR, VR based sightseeing experiences while abroad, which allow me to unlock different brand deals, benefits in the form of NFTs, where it's a gamified collector experience on site, which allows me to sightsee along the way while discovering hidden gems and having a more immersive experience. And perhaps if I just went through the top 10 things off of TripAdvisor or something like that. And then obviously getting to the end point, the commemoration after the fact, I think, is the most important. And this is where time and time again we see this behavior playing out with physical souvenirs, but to create that digital record of experiences in such a way that allows you to not only just as a matter of nostalgia and commemoration, say, this it's a very cool thing, a bit like putting pins in a map on your wall or flipping through the stamps in your passport to commemorate and celebrate both individually and together this wealth of experiences that you've had along the way. And one of the lines in that regard I like to say is that where you've been says much about who you are as what you've done, where you've been. And I think that plays out very nicely in this sense of treating this as a collectorship experience that has certainly like practical benefits before and during travel, but then utilizing the commemoration after the fact to form that picture of identity that not only can be commemorated for personal purposes, but then shared as a matter of a matter of legacy and identity.
Wow, it sounds like there's so many possibilities and different paths you can go down. And like you said, you've almost got to double down on the things that work, and you're not really sure what is going to take off and what people are going to gravitate towards. So it's very, very interesting. And you mentioned the stats about millennials. Would you say they're your main target market at the moment?
Yeah, I think so. I would say millennials primary, Gen Z secondary. And again, this a lot of this is like just based upon our evidence so far, but it will be telling very early on to see how this stands up. Really, our offering to begin with is very rooted in the travel sharing aspect of all of this. So collecting as you go, and then using that to be able to create a one-stop shop for all your experiences is a way to share that with friends and be in the wheeling and dealing of travel inspiration, both on the creation side, so collecting and utilize and being able to share your travels to inspire others, whereas at the same time as watching the travels of others as they collect and being inspired by what they're doing. And we see that time and time again in the data that we have that millennials are A, traveling the most, and B, sharing the most. So that is our sweet spot for the time being. But obviously, it's not like it'd be foolish to rule out Gen Z from this equation as well. I think there's a lot of crossovers, specifically on the upper end of Gen Z with the younger end of millennials. I think there's a lot of gray area there. So that's kind of the sweet spot that we're looking to play in currently.
Yeah, but I mean, a lot of people have many different convoluted approaches to doing their travel research. So, I mean, this applies to most people, I feel. How did starting MintPass go? Did you have an idea and get on it right away, or did it take some time to get going?
Good question. Unfortunately, it took me quite a bit of time to get going. And I mentioned in the backstory there that this was very early on in my Web3 journey. This was an idea that came to me, which was in the middle to late part of 2021. And I knew that there was something interesting there, and I specifically vividly remember like where I was, what I was doing when the idea came to be, and I was at the gym, and I told my wife Morgan, I was like, holy shit, this is it, this is the idea that I'm going to make reality. And then there's this story, and you see time and time again with a lot of these like Hulu, Netflix specials about entrepreneurs where the idea hits and they're like into full force, and it's next thing you know, 6 months later, it's a big thing. So that did not happen for me. So I knew I literally created like the basically the most basic form of business plan, the target audience, the user profiles, everything else that night. And then 18 months went by. And it had been in the back of my mind the whole time. And I'd created some material for it. And it was something that as I had one-off conversations, I would either soft pitch it or I would just kind of, you know, categorize it in my mind to say this is a conversation worth picking up at a future point in time whenever this nebulous thing happens. And I can't say that I regret waiting, because I think I would have thought about this much differently in the heat of the bull market than I do in the depths of the bear market, where I think it's actually a strength where I'm building this to not be implicated by any sort of market conditions now or in the future, which I think is a good thing. But at large, I do sort of regret how long it took me, and I think there's a larger theme here around just the entrepreneurial journey and the ups and downs. And I think in this day and age, with everyone having a platform, everyone having a voice, it's very popular to go out on LinkedIn and talk about how hard you're working and the hustle culture of it all and the grind and everything else that comes with running a startup, which is I can say is not untrue, but it was daunting to me. Like, it's a big step to take this plunge, and I didn't have a co-founder at that point in time, or I didn't have a team around me to support and being in the trenches during the early stages of growing a business. And so I never took the jump, or I guess I should say I never did, but it took me a while to take that jump. And that changed earlier this year. That was frankly a part of like my New Year's resolution, was just saying like I'm going to make this happen in the year 2023, and that's what I've done. And we're in September now, several months later. We have a team working on it. We have a development team that's building out our initial product right now. We have a product lead. We have a tech lead. We have a designer. And it's cool to see like it finally taking shape. I was telling you before this call that I got the merch in last night, and so this is my first time actually wearing the brand apparel. So it's super fulfilling for me, honestly, to like actually see this bird-brained idea that I had 2 years ago now take shape and give it substance. But at the same time, realizing that you haven't done anything yet. Like having a hat with your logo on it doesn't mean anything. So I'm most excited about, in the latter part of this year, actually launching something. And to the earlier point, like just seeing what people want to do with it and how they use it, whether they find it cool, whether they don't, and being able to adjust accordingly. Because ultimately, you're not going to be able to guess at what people are going to want. You got to put it in their hands and see what they want, and then build to that.
Quick interruption from me. The podcast is starting to gain traction, which is amazing, and thank you so much for the support. If I could ask you to do one little thing, could you please rate this podcast on whichever podcast platform you listen on? That little action goes a lot further than you think and would really help the podcast grow. Thanks in advance. I really appreciate it. Back to the episode. And would you say that the New Year's resolution was the only sort of catalyst that enabled you to take that leap, or did you have to sort of shift your mindset, or how did you get over that hurdle?
Yeah, so I think it was a big catalyst, just deciding that I'm going to do it, but I think it was catalyzed by other things as well, where I found myself, which I think a lot of people have been in this spot, that you end up in like a content spiral. Like I've seen this tweet. It always resonates with me time and time again when all these random trying to be LinkedIn or Twitter thought leaders say it, which, although in this case it's actually true, that smart people's form of procrastination is learning. Where I was in that spot for a year plus, where I had consumed every YouTube entrepreneurial video out there. I read the Lean Startup. I read all of these books that everyone recommends about how to start a business and run a successful startup. And they weren't not helpful, but at the end of the day, you actually have to go do it in order to put those learnings to use. So I basically got to the point where I said, look, every piece of content that I'm consuming is basically saying the same thing in different ways, where I should just, at this point, just go do it and learn along the way. Like, reading another book's not going to make me more or less ready to create something. And to be honest, since I've done it, I've been, if I knew then how ill prepared I was, despite having learned all that along the way, I might not have done this. Not that jokes. That's mostly joking. But my point is, I've learned so much more by doing than I ever did or would have learned by just consuming content. And I've actually made a conscious effort in recent months to forego a lot of that content. Like, I still get random newsletters here and there, or nuggets of wisdom from people who have grown and sold a startup and their business is now telling other people how to do that same thing. Like, it's just noise. And so I might, not that you ask me for what my advice would be, and I haven't really done anything yet. So not that I'm like necessarily as someone who should be giving great advice, but as someone who's been at this for several months, that's always my advice to anyone who's kind of exploring the opportunity to take that plunge, just to go do it, because you'll learn infinitely more along the way by either making successes or making mistakes, but just adjusting to things as you go, than you'll ever learn by consuming content and spinning wheels on how it should be done. So that's ultimately, back to it, that's ultimately what I said. I drew the line in the sand. I'm done with this. I need to actually go do something. And that's what I've done. I've actually gone and done something.
Nice. Yeah, I agree. I had a similar experience with this podcast, where I think Cody Sanchez or some creator uses the term mental masturbation. And you do all the research before it, and it is really just boils down to just doing it, and you'll learn everything you need to along the way.
100%.
So how did you mentioned that you sort of found crypto through your poker days, but what sort of drew you into the NFT space and buying a JPEG on the internet?
So honestly, peer pressure. I had friends who were doing it at like an egregious level, and it was one night where I was just kind of exploring it, and it's like a nostalgia's hitting me. One night of exploring it, and ended up, I'm not even going to give the price point of what it was when I bought it, because it's not worth that or nearly close to it today, but spent way too much money on a animal JPEG. And it was a magical experience. And like, I don't regret it at all, because it shifted the way I think about online communities at large. And shortly thereafter, so I bought this JPEG, and it's like anything else. You then go, I hadn't been on Twitter a number of years before that. I created a new Twitter account, which is the one I still use today. I went out and changed my profile picture, tweeted out that I had bought one of these things. And all of a sudden, you have all of these other community members coming in and are congratulating you, welcoming you, shouting out. There was a specific sort of phrase that this particular project used, where I was getting all that in my DMs. And it was like this dopamine rush of an experience all at once, where you had like these random people on the internet that, because you bought the same JPEG that they have, and there's a larger message around, this community that you choose to be affiliated with, that saying something about you as a person, and then being connected online with all these people who share that in common with you was a very special thing. So I became really drunk on it in some ways, and I started dabbling with others, and it becomes fun to not only find like the new buzzy project, but find projects that resemble a part of who you are and what you resonate with on a very psychological level. So I got deeply into it that way. There were the in-person events that came up right after that. I went to NFT NYC a few months later. So then getting to go to a lot of the parties that are associated with these projects, which again was like the peak of the bull market. So there's a lot of like energy and buzz around it all. But that was like my gateway into it all. And I can't say that I've done too much recently, like a lot of people, just because I've been distracted with the business and efforts elsewhere. But it's there. The bull market was obviously in a number of ways irrational. Like we can go back and say, well, maybe that was a little bit of a bubble at the time. But it was a unique experiment in human psychology, which I think plays into so many different aspects of what this technology can be in other applications. So yes, it is absurd to buy an animal JPEG and become strangers or become friends with 5,000 other strangers on the internet just because you've invested a gross amount of money into this same thing off the same smart contract. And perhaps that didn't, like, it felt at the time, perhaps that didn't actually link us other than us all wanting to make money to have that asset go up over time and to be able to sell and be rich. And by pushing that community, that then made that price go up, which was good for all of us. But there's so many different worlds of interest and passion that can be made better by this. And it goes back a little bit to what we discussed earlier and what we're trying to do in travel, where the aspect of bringing people together over something they're passionate about digitally, I think is a very special thing. And in the world of travel, I like to say, we talked a little bit before we got on here about your trip to Rome, and I've been to Rome a couple of times, and we had this moment of connection where we had experiences at different moments in time, but by having this conversation, we kind of bring those moments together in a really cool way where we had we had a shared experience, albeit not together, in having experienced this culture of Italy and Rome, the historical nature of it, and so on and so forth. So, how do you create scalability to that moment in time such that you can connect digitally with perhaps others that have had a similar experience, been to the same restaurant, and sharing in that moment, not together but together, if that makes sense, it becomes a very special thing. So that's where I think NFTs have become very cool. And I think a lot of like the bull market I see was a stepping stone to what it is today. So to consolidate, yeah, that's how I got into it way back when. But I see that experience instrumental to how I think about it today and how I think really it's evolved to be a much broader thing than just degenerating into animal JPEGs.
Yeah, I feel the same. One thing that I learned a lot about while trading NFTs in the bull market was just the marketing side of things. Because of the transparency, it changed the way people needed to market their product. You couldn't, because a lot of products on normal e-commerce stores will create fake hype or fake limited amount of their product to incentivize people to buy, whereas marketers in the NFT space couldn't use that tool. You could just look on the contract and see how many NFTs there really were. So they had to be more innovative and think outside the box in order to create that hype and get people to buy their NFTs. Although, yes, in the bull market, you had a lot of people sort of shouting that project from the rooftops, which sort of helped and created that FOMO aspect. But I feel like there was a bit of innovation in terms of like how you deliver your product to people, how you portray it, all that type of thing. I found it fascinating.
Yeah, sorry, just to echo that and to kind of compare it to like a real world counterexample. So that verified scarcity, I think, is key in all of this. Where I think this is something that I've fallen for this banana time and time again. So like if I'm shopping for my wife, let's say, and I'm out looking for a handbag for her, and I'm getting bamboozled by the salesperson, and I see something, oh, this looks like she'd like that, and they come to me and say, there's only 8 of these in the world. You have to get this now. That we were blessed to have this provided to our store, and someone over there might have been looking at it. I think you should probably get on this as a very unique opportunity at a very reasonable price point before it sells very quickly. And like I'm like, oh yeah, let's do it. Let me buy this right now. Here, take my money. But like what is to actually to make that to be true? There is no mechanism for me to verify that, and I probably was hoodwinked into that purchase time and time again, based upon this perception of scarcity, this perception of value that may or may not exist. And that's brand comes in heavily into that, hype comes into all of that. To your point, so the mechanics of verified scarcity are very key, and it's like a meme in the JPEG community too. Like for my purposes, for my CryptoPunk, there's only, I don't know how many there actually are, but like there's only 250 cigarette CryptoPunks and however many billionaires in the world. Like it is true. Like it's a very cool factor in all of this is that there will only be X number of this thing, And we always know that based upon on-chain data. So what that exactly means, I don't exactly know yet. Like it's only valuable if people deem it to be valuable. And that's really the magic question of this is like, will these things become valuable over time, depending on these number of factors, intrinsic in the historical nature of these things, extrinsic in the utility that is provided through them, and such and such.
Yeah, exactly. And do you think that the tech is here to stay?
Yeah, I'm inclined to think so. I do think that I don't think we're properly, I'm trying to think of the best way to word this. I don't think that we're properly looking at the right use cases for that tech. And time again, I read these like long blogs and thought pieces on like what crypto could be and everything it stands to disrupt from the entire financial system and verification of identity through on-chain experience tracking and all of these things. But then you actually like look at like what that front end looks like, and it's just so impractical from a usability standpoint. And sometimes some like the unique, like not I wouldn't want to say unique, but like convoluted architectures that some of these things encapsulate. Like even I, as someone who's been doing this for full time hours for the past 2+ years, I just like I don't even understand it. And at that point, like I don't even want to engage with it. And if I don't want to engage with it, how do we expect anyone outside of this tight knit bubble to want to engage with it at any future point in time? So I think we have a long ways to go to get. I think so. To answer your question, I think the technology is here to stay. I think the question is, what does stay look like from the standpoint of mainstream adoption? Like, do we continue to have like this bubble of people who are just tossing around liquidity, playing hot potato with either JPEGs or shit coins or whatever else because they have nothing else to do, and they masquerade as like technology evangelist over everything that this could be, but then they're trading Doge and passing around. I don't want to take shots at too many ongoing projects, but there's certain environments today that I don't think are very conducive to mainstream appeal, as they are short-term oriented around financial incentives as opposed to use case adoption and appeal. So I think the tech is here to stay. I think it has to come a long way for it to become actually viable in a more mainstream sense. And I don't think that looks like a truly and fully decentralized world, and where everyone has to own their keys and everyone's responsible for their stuff and everyone is at risk of being hacked by clicking a link at any given point in time. I think there has to be middle ground to be had between the old world and the new world, thinking about Web 2 and Web 3, where you have like the guardrails, protection, and experience of Web 2 with the autonomy, transparency, whatever else you want to think about in the Web3 world. And once we get to that point where you can walk the middle ground, where you can feel safe and comfortable and familiar with what you're doing in this world, where the back end is providing you with all the benefits that Web3 has promised in a number of ways, I think then we get to a point where we can actually not only have this technology be viable, but actually scale it to a more broad mainstream audience.
Right. And many people who are on the outside looking in associate NFTs with JPEGs of apes or any other animal. Do you think this view has affected the progress of Web3?
They're not wrong. I don't think. I think it's implicated, but not perhaps affected. And I think a lot of times it's been our own responsibility in setting us up for that. And I say our being the Web3 community at large. The fact of the matter is, and I've written about this before, that during the bull market, when we were, like when Justin Bieber was buying apes for 1.2 million, even though technically they were 4 apes, which has made for a very fun headline over the past few months of he bought his ape for 1.2 and now it's worth 25K or whatever. The real, I guess, public use case for it was money making, and that was like the narrative around it was ape holders minted for a few $100, and then at one point they were worth $500,000. Like, it was mathematically the highest return investment in the history of mankind, and that is a story worth talking about. So when that becomes the story, and that is the story, that is what people are going to become engaged for, is that story. And so not only outside liquidity, but holders themselves, that was a part of the narrative, was apes becoming rich and the airdrops of ApeCoin and the getting airdrops of Mutant, which then became worth $50,000 to $100,000, where in aggregate at one point, I think ape holders were basically had been gifted $1 million in value, which that's the story. But when that story runs dry, and I use dry in a number of ways when it comes to not only the interest in the story itself, but the liquidity from outside markets, that story goes away very quickly. But the remnants is the counter of that story, which was the getting too close to the sun, and what goes up must come down to that story. So to be honest, to the outsiders, Web3 hasn't looked very appealing when that is like the main story in the public purview, is not how much money people are making, but how much money people have lost along the way. So I don't think it's necessarily set us back. I think it's had impact on mainstream perception, but at the same time, back to like use case and what leads us to adoption, it was never going to be money making. It was never going to be JPEGs of animals that become the most profitable investments of all time. It is, how can Web3 make my life better? But I say that for the purposes of our conversation, but in reality, what it looks like in practicality is no one actually knowing they're using Web3, or no one actually knowing they're engaged in NFTs. And it's what's awesome to see is, despite current market conditions, you have the likes of Starbucks, you have the likes of Amazon, the Reddits of the world, who are very publicly engaged in Web3 projects, but those outside the bubble of Web3 have no idea that they're engaging with a Web3 project. And that's what we have to get to. So like the closing point in all of that, I guess, is that it doesn't really matter what the mainstream sees about, the NFT market as we know it, from the standpoint of like ape JPEGs and shitcoins and everything else, because what gets them to use it is irregardless of the specifics of Web3 and NFTs. And so once we get to that point, that's when we see that mainstream adoption. It's not going to be like the buzzy headlines that leads us to the promised land, so to speak.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And all this sort of reminiscing of the bull market got me thinking about gamification. And like, I'm sure gamification, well, it obviously plays a role in MintPass and like developing an app. So what's your view on gamification, and what are your thoughts of incorporating it into MintPass, and have you done so already?
Yeah, so it's a good question. And so my opinion on gamification is that it is everything. And I say that from experience, because I grew up playing video games, as I think like a lot of people did. In particular, I don't even want to admit, nor do I frankly have a number, but it's probably a gross amount of hours that I put into World of Warcraft. Like, I grew up on games like that. And not only from the standpoint of like being in the world, like sitting by myself at home and grinding the game itself, but the number of real world connections that I've made that were made possible by World of Warcraft, and both the people that I work with, friends that I still have today. I have a wedding in a couple weeks, where I'm going to a wedding of one of my best friends who I pseudo met through World of Warcraft. My business partner today was a guy who I met through World of Warcraft. So it's like games are they're like, obviously from the standpoint of business, they're like retention focused behavioral loops. It's good to get people engaged and keep them engaged in what it is you're trying to do, and get them through, like, you think about like missions in a game, get them through sort of the check boxes of what you want them to accomplish in this environment, and keep them coming back to continue that behavior. But it also brings people together. I think like that is an important theme that is often lost in traditional gamification conversations, is like, games are fun for people to do together. So I think from the standpoint of like the mechanics of games is important for like building an app. So that's one thing in regards to MintPass. But then I think with the mission of what we want to bring people closer together through travel, that plays into it as well. So I think that's an important factor. Like, I don't want games to be predatory in nature. I want them to be fulfilling in nature. And so that is how I see gamification at large. What that looks like for MintPass is evolving is the short answer. So we've brought in an advisor, Yu-Pai Chow. He wrote a book called Actionable Gamification, which I basically see as the gospel for all things gamification. I read it myself. It changed drastically my thinking about that world. And it really, what I want to do with MintPass evolved from that writing, and to have that author of that book, Yu-Kai, on our team is phenomenal at this stage. So we're looking to basically, so I think there's a real social mechanism, social fabric, social hierarchy, if you will, around travel, where, and we see this time and time again on social media, where you have these one of our advisors actually used this word recently, which I love, is travel tastemakers, where you give a certain person in your network a level of gravity or even credence tied to what they've done when they travel. And so maybe when I see them post a story and I see them somewhere, maybe I perceive them to be a foodie, maybe I perceive them to be a wino, an adventurer, someone who like has this sort of niche of specialty where like I trust their take on whatever it is that they do. And when you attribute that to travel, it becomes very valuable. So how do you create like a gamified architecture around that, such to give someone as a traveler a certain level of gravitas, of credibility tied to their experiences, and provide a metric associated with that, and then create that sort of ongoing engagement-based unlock experience along the way, such that when I do certain things when I'm abroad or domestic for that matter, I can then unlock and attach again a part of like attach achievements to your travel record and your sort of travel cred, if you will. And so all that to combine, I know that's like, as I'm talking, I'm like, wow, this is actually very nondescript, but I'm talking through my thought process as I think about it, like, how do you create an architecture to that? Like, how do you take the person who, again, when I think about, I know that I want to go to London, and I know that I have a friend that went to London 6 months ago, and I may not know exactly what they did, but I trust their experiences because they're so well traveled and they do such amazing things based upon what they post on social media when they travel. How do I create a gamified architecture economy around that experience? And how do I elevate that person who is that network tastemaker? They may not be like a true travel influencer per se, but like their network trusts them based upon their travel experiences. And to create a platform for that experience, I think becomes really special. So I don't know exactly what that looks like yet. We have some ideas in mind and we're going to be testing some things out early, but that at least kind of, it starts to at least a little bit explain how we think about that world and what we want to institute from a gamification standpoint to really glean that aspect out.
It seems like there's such a fine line between like easy gamification in the sense that you gamify it, but it's easy to achieve or unlock certain features. And so it doesn't have that like gravitas of like you earned it and worked for it. And then the other side of the spectrum where it's too difficult and people lose interest because they're like, oh, I can't unlock these features. I've got to jump through too many hoops or something like that. So it seems like there's like a tightrope you got to walk in the sense that like you got to keep people entertained, but like it's not too difficult, but not too easy. And it seems interesting.
Yeah, it's funny enough. This past weekend, I spent some time like basically laying out like what our achievement architecture is going to look like. So you'll end up getting badges for things like how many countries you visited, how many miles you traveled, like the kind of the obvious ones. But then other sorts of fun things like go to 5 islands and just different like fun little like unlocks like that it could even be like surprise and delight along the way. Like you might unintentionally go to a couple islands and say like, oh shit, I unlocked an island achievement. Now I got to plan my future vacations on going to more islands. The stuff like that, like I think surprise and delight plays into this nicely. But then to your point, I don't think you have to balance the attainable with the attainable with the aspirational, where I like Pokemon Go, I think does a very good job of this, where when you first download the app and you start playing, you can basically catch a few Pokemon, spin a few Pokestops, and you get like 5 levels. Like, oh shit, this is easy. Let's keep this humming. And then as I've eventually got to, I think I'm like level 28 or 29 or something. And it's like you spend months playing before you get to that next level. And it's that mix of like, again, approachable, where once you start engaging with it, like you can start unlocking pretty quickly. And so we're setting up the initial stages for that. Like just take one trip, get your first achievement. I think that's a fun little thing. Like you start to customize your profile pretty easily that way and start to level up quickly. But then we want to also make it very clear that like you have to really put in work to reach the peak of what it is that we're offering, both in the actual travels you've had, but more importantly, the diversity of travels and going to different places. We don't want to create an infrastructure where like, the business traveler going to the same 2 stops once a week becomes like the primo of the ecosystem. We want the people who are going out and seeing the world, exploring it and trying new different things, and basically are living this sort of vision for diversity of experience that we have in our minds that we want to reward. So that's how we're building it, is to like not only make it about the actual volume of travel, but the diversity of travel. And there's a lot in gamification that will make that more advantageous for those that are traveling that way.
It's exciting. And I wanted to get into a few founder-focused questions. What has been your biggest challenge in founding MintPass so far?
Yeah, where do I start? Not, I mean, that jokes aside, like not really a ton. I think like anything else, it's something that I didn't expect. Like no one said starting a company is easy. I think the two biggest challenges that probably boil down to things don't happen fast enough. Like I see this obviously beyond most things besides family in my life as my number one priority. Family and friends. Sorry to any of my friends watching. Family and friends, and then MintPass. So it's so important to me, obviously, but I have to have this constant understanding it's not going to be as important to anyone else. So when I'm chomping at the bit to get stuff done, whether it be on the investment side, partnerships, legal, administrative, accounting, whatever the case may be, I'm like, let's get this done now. And it can be a frustrating experience for me to not have it done now. And to have that sort of level of patience and understanding and really forgiveness to say, okay, this just will not be as important to others as it is to me, and that's okay. And I can still maintain progress while things may not move as quickly as I'd like. Rationalizing that, I think, would be the first one. And then second was just about balance, because it's unlike, I think when you grow up in sort of the traditional education system, so much of success is tied to just completion of objectives, and this plays into gamification a little bit too, where you go on a quest, and when you accomplish that quest of collecting 10 plain strider feathers in the barrens, to quote probably what is an actual World of Warcraft quest, you get 500 experience points. And it's like there's a clear sort of cause and effect relationship between what you do, check the box, and then the output of the reward you get on the back end. And that doesn't really apply in the startup world, where there is, at least in an immediate sense, no cause and effect relationship between the things you do day to day and the output reward you get on the back end of it. And with that in mind, it can be challenging in a way to prioritize, because some things feel like they're urgent and some things feel like they aren't, when in fact that may not be the case. So I think time management certainly is one, but then two, uh, back to balance, like understanding that not everything has to be done right away, because I think it's by the nature of it, again, back to sort of the achievement based success. You accomplish something, and I should say, you take care of a responsibility, or you finish a mission, let's say, and you're done. Whereas in startup land, there's always something more to do. So walking that balance of like, of obviously working hard and getting stuff done, but then also being able to say, I know that there's more stuff to do, but I'm going to take time away and understand that I can get it done later, and it'll actually make my larger work picture better, because I'm able to take mental time off and put time and attention to other parts of my life, family, friends, personal life elsewhere. So I think work-life balance, but that's the same for other entrepreneurs, but also people that aren't entrepreneurs, just have jobs. Like, that's not unbreaking by any means. I found it to be a bit of a different beast in the startup.
And is your team remote or local, and why have you decided to go that particular route?
Yeah, we're all remote. I would never want to sacrifice talent in favor of location. Like, I've always wanted to get the right and the best people, regardless of where they are, which remote would be required for that. I don't really have a strong take on like let's say, in 5 years time, or less than that, 2 to 3 years time, we're humming along, we hit our stride. Hopefully sooner than later, find product market fit, raise a bunch of money, build out the team. It just goes back to like the leadership and the culture you set up, which for our purposes, it's been very much like a fluid culture. Like, I very much the type to not micromanage like the hours anyone puts into their work, or be critical of people taking time for personal things during the day. And I think that's created a healthy environment for remote teams, where everyone's on board with getting the work done they need to get done when they want to or can get it done, which I think results in max output and max efficiency. And for me, my biggest thing is time zones, and really creating the windows for collaboration, whether it be remote or in person. So that is the one thing that I've tried to structure as best I can, where the core team members right now are based in the same time zone as myself, where we basically have our 8 to 10 plus hours a day where we're locked in together, and then we can get maximum done, as opposed to having to cross over and having some people offline while others are online. So it's kind of like, I see it as like the middle ground, where I'm fine with remote, but I want to maximize the amount of time that we have together working in our sort of respective worlds.
Right. And would you say time zone being like particularly like the Vegas time zone or like the US is
Mm,
time zone specific enough?
yeah, it's. I mean, for my purposes, selfishly, it would start with like West Coast time. So California, Vegas, like Washington, Vancouver to hit up in Canada as well. But and then the further you get away, just the more problematic it gets. So
Yeah.
that's my own personal preference. I understand that that's like not for everyone. Like and to the first point, time zones would be trumped by the right person. So if we were to, and we do have our product designer on our team is based in the Philippines, and she's phenomenal. And I'm not going to not hire her because we only have a couple hours a day of collaboration. And that's the beautiful part about it is if you get the right people in place abroad or in New York, 3 hours away, like it doesn't really matter from an efficiency standpoint where people are. Again, like I'm like an over communicator, so like I love to just be able to be in the Slack and shooting the shit all day about various things and topics related to the business and otherwise. So the more time I could have with my team online, the better. But as long as the work gets done and gets done well, then I could actually care less where people are at.
That makes sense. And I know it's still early days, but has there been a most enjoyable moment so far?
That's actually a tougher question to answer than you think, which sounds like I might be miserable, but I promise you I'm not. It's just about like putting together like the most enjoyable. I think probably the most enjoyable moment would be so our our product lead, and I guess like I've been alluding to them and call them by name. Our product lead Sean and our tech lead Aaron, they came out for an in-person on-site a couple months ago, and it was just this is anecdotal, and I'm sorry for spending more time on this than we probably need to, but we met in a meeting room that I'd use a lot in my poker days, and there was I we don't need to get into the whole backstory there, but long story short, I rose up very quickly to that company, and we started off as a 24/7 TV network, and me being like youngest of millennials at that stage, and I was a cord cutter, never was a cable or direct TV subscriber. I just said, why are we swimming upstream as opposed to creating a subscription service, a streaming channel, and whatnot. And at the time, I was in that meeting room meeting. I was with like, media heavy hitters who were trying to push this 24/7 TV network. And I was the junior. I sat there twiddling my thumbs, very quiet, and listening to the smart people talk about, big brain strategy stuff. And over time, the structure of our company changed. We ended up going with that streaming model. That's kind of what allowed me to have a more significant role with the business and running content. And that became what Poker Go is today. And there was this moment of being in that room for me and now meeting with my team and like at the early stages at the early stages back then, it was like I was a junior person in the room, kind of just sitting there watching everything that's going on around me. And it was this moment of recollection. Like it's been almost 10 years since then. And to have that sort of moment of like, it's like, oh shit, like I'm actually building something now. Like the roles have been reversed. Like I'm kind of the decision maker. I'm the strategist. Like it's my vision that we're here to talk about and bring to life. It was this full circle moment, not from the standpoint of like, ha, so much power, but like, I wake up every day and I'm just so blessed that people believe in this, believe in me and believe in us. And it was that moment that was like, oh shit, like let's go do this. Like this is there are people believe in this. This could be something incredibly cool, and I'm in charge of it, and I don't take that for granted. And that's back to it. Like that's what I focus on every day is being that person to the best of my abilities. And it was like that was again, so back to the question. Like that was like the most joyful moment for me of that realization. And then now having like the day-to-day ability to actually execute on everything that it is that we want to do and everything that we believe in.
That's great. And just being conscious of time, I know we have time for a few more questions. So I know you're a VC at Dream Ventures, but now you're on the other side of that interaction and looking for funding. What has your experience been looking for funding so far?
It's been good. It's been interesting in the climate of the current market conditions, where perhaps it would have been easier 18 months ago to go out as a Web3 product with an innovative use case to raise a bunch of money, but the perspective has changed a little bit. But I think it's just how we position things, and it's been interesting. I think early on in the process for us, just to get the feedback first and foremost, to say like, first off, like how are Web3 investors feeling? I think there are some that have been brutalized and all but have left the space, but there's others that are doubling down and saying, this is a buying opportunity. This is where we're going to get good deals. This is where we're going to win in the long term. So being able to get that feedback as quickly as possible, and then for our purposes, adjust our positioning accordingly. Like to some people, and that's the beautiful part of what it is that we're building is it's like I said earlier, like it's not necessarily like a Web3 contingent project. So certainly for some people, we want to glean out the Web3 side. For others, for most, we want to glean out the AI side. For another subset, we want to glean out some more of like the travel, experiential, social side. So it's kind of, there's something for everyone in that regard. So that's been the most interesting part for me is like, as much as it's about us pitching MintPass, it's always curious for me, like what people get out of it. Like there's just, the questions we get have been fascinating from the standpoint of like, you asked earlier, why would this be Web3, which is something I get a lot from the more Web3 type VCs. But then elsewhere, I get more on like the travel and booking side, like, how we want to be a partner to some of the big travel players. And so there's an entire spectrum, I guess, of curiosities that come out of this from VCs and investors. And it's been enlightening for me because obviously like I've had hundreds of founder conversations on the investor side, and I have a certain way of looking at the world, which has guided our investment thesis. But to then be on the flip side of that and to see the investment theses in real time of all these different players and to see the broad spectrum of it has been really interesting as a different perspectives really, as I've gone about the process.
Interesting. Well, thanks for joining me today, Sam. I really appreciate you taking the time. I learned a lot from our conversation and really can't wait to download and use MintPass. Get a head start on everyone else.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If you're there early, it's a big advantage. More achievements to be had, more points to be accumulated. And I'll quickly plug at the end. We are going to be opening things up on a limited basis to start with, so it actually would behoove people to be there early because earlier means earlier access. So mintpass.com, www.mintpass.com is where to sign up for the wait list. So go there. All we ask for is your email. We're not going to send you anything spammy. In fact, it's actually fun. I send like a weekly quiz that's travel related just because I think it's cool and something that I like to do and I like to compete with people. Again, gamification. So if you want to be on our wait list, if you want to be on our mailing list and get fun stuff like that, sign up at mintpass.com.
Perfect. Is there anything else you'd like to plug where people can find you or anything like that?
I guess you can connect with me on LinkedIn. No plug. I just like to create fun content and talk about things that I know vaguely about. So if that sounds interesting to you based upon the conversation that we had here, connect with me at linkedin.com. And I think it's /Samson Simmons. But if you search my name, Sam Simmons, you'll find this guy, and that's who to connect with.
Great. I actually did one of the email you sent out today with the food quiz. It was really fun.
Yeah, how'd you do?
I got 9 out of 10, so pretty chuffed with that.
Very good. Very good. I made the quiz and I got 8 out of 10, so well done.
Thanks. Well, thanks for joining me again, Sam, and chat soon. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate you making it all the way to the end. I hope you enjoyed the episode. One more quick reminder before you go. I have a weekly newsletter by the same name, Another Excuse, where I cover 4 topics: something that has changed my perception, a tool that could be useful to you, content that is actually worth consuming, and a concept that I try break down and explain. If this sounds of any interest to you and you need a kick up the arse, then you can subscribe at the link below. Thanks for joining me again, and I'll see you next week.